So I'm John Haig. I am the co-director of the Mosava Rahmani Center for Business and Government. It's great to see so many of you here. And obviously you found the pizza, always a great attraction for students. You will get the long introduction of our speaker today because he is slow to get here, but he's on his way. And in fact, he's walking in the back door as we speak. Um, our speaker today is Cass Sunstein, and I must confess, this is one of the most interesting titles that we've had for a seminar. Welcome, Cass. Take your time. I'm giving kind of semi-long introduction for you. Um, the title today is How to Become Famous, Lost Einsteins, Forgotten Superstars, and How the Beatles Came to Be. And like I said, that has to be one of the more interesting titles of any seminar I think we've given for the Center for Business and Government. Just a few things about Cass. He is the Robert Walmsley University Professor here at Harvard. He's the founder and director of the Program on Behavioral Economics and Public Policy at Harvard Law School. In 2018, he received the Holberg Prize from the government of Norway. I don't know how many of you know the Holberg Prize. But many people think it is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for Law and Humanities. Um, in, in my own background, I know him a little bit from, he was the head of OIRA, which is the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs in the White House. And they are one of the people that review regulations and look at them through the lens, and I don't want to put words in Cass's mouth, but through the lens of benefits and costs. And then he's testified before congressional committees multiple times. He advises the Behavioral Insights team in the United Kingdom and the other country kinds of activities. He is the author of hundreds and hundreds of articles and dozens of books. He writes faster than I can read. So sometimes it's a little tough to keep up. He's got a variety of projects going on now involving the regulatory state. And with that, Cass, I just want to say thanks for coming. And the stage is all yours.
Okay, better. Okay, it's a complete thrill to be here. And let me give you a glimpse of why. Um, Charles Dickens did a new edition of a book, and his preface uh, says, roughly, with great Dickensian beauty, um, no one can feel the sorrow I feel in putting this book to rest. Says every parent has in his heart of hearts a favorite child, and his name is David Copperfield. And you can tell his feeling and delight. And I, I ain't got a David Copperfield in me, but you're about to hear my favorite child. And Jeff Kehoe from Harvard Business Review Press is the parent. I'm the sibling of this book. Jeff is the parent. Okay. So, do you know the Byrds? The Byrds were contemporaries of the Beatles, and they sang the immortal words, "So you want to be a rock and roll star? Then listen now to what I say. Just get an electric guitar, take some time, and learn how to play." That's an account. It could be understood as a universalizable account, could bear on economics or a startup. There's an idea there. Here's a different idea from Ecclesiastes, rock group that preceded the Beatles, and they were a little more downbeat, equally poetic, maybe more so. The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. Have you heard these words before? The Bible. Neither bread to the wise nor riches to men. This isn't like a rock group that was named after a book of the Bible. This is the book of the Bible. Neither bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. Okay, that's really good. That's a very different view from the view expressed by the Byrds. And here's one of our heroes, Bob Dylan. We aren't worthy. And here's what he said during a hilarious interview in which the interviewer kept pressing him. Why are you so famous? Why are you so famous? And he would keep saying ridiculous things like, I'm a song and dance man, or things that weren't really responsive. And then the interviewer said with exasperation, I find that you really have no idea as to why you are popular. No thoughts on why you are popular. And 20 something Dylan is basically losing his mind here with the questions to which he has no answer, and he doesn't finding an answer within his competence or his interest. I just haven't really struggled for that. It happened, you know? It happened like anything else happens, just a happening. You don't try to figure out happenings, you dig happenings. So I'm not going even to talk about it. Okay, sorry, Mr. Dillon. With respect, I'm going to talk about it. Okay, this is, you've seen many books, haven't you, that are why to become famous? This is the first book that is how to become famous. No, no, no. That's, I haven't used that line, and I think I'm gonna, because its absurdity and preposterousness is very pleasing. Pause over it, would you? You've probably read 24 books, haven't you, on why to become famous? But have you ever read a book about how to become famous? There's nothing sensible in that question. Okay, so this is a can't miss how-to guide. If you don't become famous, not after the talk, but after reading the book, you're getting your money back because it's a guarantee. Okay, that's not what the book is about at all, and that's not what these remarks are about. Here's a clue, the story of this extremely unlikely project. In 2021 and into 2022, I was working full time in the US government. I'm now working part time. As I shifted from full time to part time, I got permission to teach again. Hooray. For me, at least, not for those in the class, I fear, but for me, for sure. And I got to write again, so long as I didn't write about politics and kind of my day job. So I thought, what do I write about? It's Christmas. Santa Claus is coming. I got to write. And Santa delivered the Journal of Beatles Studies. That was good. So I wrote the editor saying, I want to write for the Journal of Beatles Studies, to which the nice expert editor said, well, what would you like to write about? And I said, I'd like to write about the difference between Norwegian Wood, a Beatles song, and a kind of follow up by Bob Dylan, which is edgier, more pointed, a combination act of one-upmanship, anything you can do, I can do better, and a form of ridicule. I thought that would be interesting. And the editor said, that's interesting, try that. And I started it, and it was so terrible what I wrote, so amateurish and clueless, that despite my exuberance, I gave up and said, I don't have anything on this topic to write. I don't know enough about music. And she said, well, if you have something else, we'd be glad to see it. So I thought, well, why don't I write about Beatlemania, which is a little more promising because there are social dynamics there that bear on the success of Apple, the success of businesses in China and Italy and France and South America, that bear on the success of President Obama and President Trump, that bear on the success of people I know really well, and also on the fact that they didn't really make it, some people I know really well. And so I wrote about Beatlemania, and I did the best I could. And I put an early draft on the Social Science Research Network, where the thesis of the paper was that in business and government, in literature and music, in romance and life, a lot depends on the black box of serendipity. And I tried to peer into the black box of serendipity for purposes of understanding the Beatles. My Social Science Research Network paper, to my astonishment, was picked up by Scientific American, The Guardian, and the New York Times. And you get the surreal feature of this? what happened to my little paper was exactly what, on a very small scale, was exactly what the paper was talking about with respect to culture. That through serendipity and, you know, high unlikelihood events, this little social science network paper went viral. And then the thought was, is there a book here? And whenever I ask myself that question, the answer shouts out, yes. Okay. I don't know if you all know Connie Converse. Most of you must know Connie Converse. Connie Converse is generally regarded as the first and greatest of the early folk singers. She was a contemporary of Bob Dylan. She was extraordinarily original. She became a spectacular success in her day. She made $1 zillion. You can find her everywhere. Sometimes when you're listening to background music, in your car or watching a TV show, it's Connie Converse, and people who are maybe a little older than you are all standing and cheering in their soul. Connie Converse yet again. Okay, I just lied. Almost everything I said was a lie. Not everything I said was a lie. That is Connie Converse. She was a folk singer. She didn't make it. She gave up. She was regarded by people who knew her um, as fantastic. She made fun of herself, saying, I have dozens of fans all over the world. She gave up as an economic failure and became an editor of a political science magazine. She died under extremely mysterious circumstances and didn't die happy. Some number of years after she died, there was something on New York radio where there was a person who had tapes of musicians for a few decades, and played approximately 2 minutes of Connie Converse on the radio. This is relatively recently. There was someone about 19 years old who went to New York University who heard the person you're looking at and thought, she's amazing. She's incredible. Who is this? And recorded the little tape of Connie Converse and stayed focused on her for a long time. When he was a bit older, he was working for a recording studio and he told a friend, this person, no one knows who she is. She's fantastic. And the friend said, why don't we assemble a record of Connie Converse songs? And they did. And Connie Converse became iconic. There's now a book about her. Her songs have sold posthumously, have been downloaded posthumously millions of times. She may well be on her way to establishing herself with the foundational status that I described in my opening falsehood-filled tale. Got it? She didn't make it, but she made it. Here's her anthem, by the way. A lady should never habituate saloons, and that is where I find myself on many afternoons. Just as I begin to blow away the foam, someone tips his hat to me and takes me home. Now, poker is a game a lady shouldn't play, and every floating poker game just seems to float my way. Chorus, don't see why they always do it. Can't be vanity, must be sheer humanity. Do you note the creativity emerging here? When some kind soul remarks with great urbanity, lady, let me take you home. Of course, there's bound to be some little aftermath that makes a pleasant ending for the straight and narrow path. The girl had skills. And as I go to sleep, I cannot help but think how glad I am that I was saved from cards and drink. Now, Helen Reddy, I am woman, hear me roar. Can that stand up to that? No. Is that a feminist anthem? Is it about sexism and gender? Is it about joy and romance? All of the above. Okay, here's some tales of fame and obscurity. Robert Johnson was a blues guitarist who died having recorded 27 songs in poverty and obscurity. No one knew his songs. Decades after his death, his music was released. He is now defining Our friend Bob Dylan and Eric Clapton said, I don't know if we could have done what we did without this guy. He's in the pantheon, but he didn't die there. Jane Austen is often regarded as the most beloved author in the English language. She is an economic success. She's an engine for business all over the world. She's an inspiration for some public officials all over the world. In her time, she was thought to be good, quite good. There was another female author you've never heard of who was thought to be kind of her equal. How did she become Jane Austen? It's a little like what might be happening to Connie Converse and what did happen to Robert Johnson. It has its specific form where a family member put together a book about her that attracted interest long after she died. As a result of that, publishers said, why don't we put our books together? And why don't we put some images together with the books of the characters? The characters started to become beloved. She became Jane Austen. John Keats, unlike Austen, and much more than Robert Johnson or Connie Converse, was super ambitious. He wanted to be Shakespeare. He died a failure, putting on his tombstone something he whose name was writ in water. That's what Keats wrote. Keats thought, no, I failed. 25 years old. He made it for the same reason, basically, that Austen did, though the dynamic is somewhat different. Here's my guy, William Blake, who was very, very in touch with the human imagination. He wrote about John Milton, the greatest religious poet in the English language, that Milton wrote in fetters when speaking of God and heaven, and freely when talking about Satan and hell, because he was of the devil's party, because he was a true poet and of the devil's party without knowing it. Pause over that if you would. That Blake says Milton, the greatest religious poet in the English language, was in fetters when he wrote about God, and at liberty when he wrote about Satan, because he was a true poet and of the devil's party without knowing it. Okay? Take that not as a claim about Milton's religious convictions, but something about the nature of the human imagination. But Blake, he was nothing in his time. He was a kind of good artist, his poetry unknown, through a dynamic a little bit like that Jane Austen benefited from. He became someone who's in the anthologies. There's our hoped for future icon, Connie Converse. The Beatles really made it. The Dave Clark Five didn't. They were quite good, and they were at their time thought to be rivals of the Beatles. How many of you heard of the Dave Clark Five? Kind of half of one, one and a half? Okay. Glad all over, catch me if you can. Okay. They were like Keats in his lifetime, though they had a burst of popularity. That's a magazine at the time where Dave Clark Five is on the cover. The Beatles didn't quite make it, nor did the Rolling Stones. And this was a time when the rivalry between the Dave Clark Five and the Beatles was economic and business gold. That's Stan Lee, Mr. Fantastic Four, Mr. Spider-Man, Mr. Hulk, Mr. Thor, Mr. Iron Man, Mr. Black Panther. The list is very long. What happened with him was when he was about 40, he was an embarrassed person working for a comic book. He was kind of the only one there. Everyone else had been fired. And his boss said, well, write something that's basically a duplicate of something that someone else did. He'd been at it for a long time, since he was about 16. And he said, well, why don't I do something a little different and a little edgy that's more real? And his wife said, that's what you should do. And he thought, this is going to be my last shot and it's going to fail, but at least I'm going to go out smiling. I know a lot about Stan Lee's biography. What I don't know, should we be a little off color for a moment? What we don't know whether it was an inside joke that his two lead characters The male hero, Rex Richard, had a power to elongate himself, and his girlfriend, Sue Richard, had the power to turn invisible. That's kind of on gender grounds too perfect and either horrifying or brilliant. Yes? Have I shocked you? Better have confused you than shocked you. Okay, so Stan Lee did the Fantastic Four, and it went crazy for reasons we don't quite get. And then he did Spider-Man. But his boss said, Spider-Man, that's ridiculous. No one's going to like Spider-Man. And then he said, well, I'll sneak it in to not a Spider-Man comic, but a comic book improbably named Amazing Stories. And Spider-Man caught a wave. And then his boss said, remember that Spider-Man character I like so much? Why don't you make that a magazine? And so much of what's in the news and on the stories in the newspaper and on the screen, that's that guy, starting at 40. He was extremely conscious, it turns out, of the mechanism I've described, though he won the lottery basically for reasons we don't fully understand with his Fantastic Four characters. And there they are. By the way, the Thing, the one who's orange at the top, wouldn't say, as Superman did, up, up, and away, but he'd stay and said, it's clobbering time. That was different. There was a kind of joyous exhilaration. It's clobbering time, not the kind of earnest, decent up, up, and away. He got young people to think, okay, it's clobbering time. That's fun. Up, and away. What could be more tedious than up, and away? Okay, there's our current hero, Ms. Swift, who made it in her lifetime. Have you noticed? Hooray for that. Um, what are the dynamics by which she became such an economic titan? They're a lot like the ones we've had some clues about, and we're going to get more concrete in a moment. Here's the moment. The moment has come. There's an experiment called the Music Lab Experiment. It's an online website in which you can download songs. And these are real names of songs: Trapped in an Orange Peel, Nah, Wish Me Luck, and I Am Error. Those are 4 of the dozens of songs. In the control condition, you can just go on the website and download the songs you like. And then with a large population, you can see which songs people like best. And let's just stipulate that Trapped in an Orange Peel is the big success, and I Am Error collapses in the design of the experiment. Okay, here's where things start to get interesting. People are sorted into subgroups, also consisting of thousands of people, which are exactly the same as what you've just heard about, except that they can see what's been downloaded before. So you can see in real time whether I Am Error has gotten 2 downloads or 400, and you can see whether Nah is on the ascendancy in the last 20 minutes, or whether no one is interested in Nah. And there are 8 subgroups. So here's a question. What's your prediction? Do you think the subgroups would look like the control? That in the end, I Am Error, if it's a catastrophe, is going to be a catastrophe everywhere? Or would you think that I Am Error could be the Beatles or could be John Keats sometime after he died? Is it going to be like John Keats early or John Keats late? Okay, the answer is that while the best songs never completely tanked and the worst songs never completely rose to the top, anything could otherwise happen. See the dynamic? And think of this as maybe diagnostic of how Barack Obama became president of the United States. I saw this in real time. I worked on the campaign. And when he was doing so badly in the national polls, he was way behind Hillary Clinton. It looked doomed. He was said to his advisors about the first primary, I want to be president of Iowa. I'm running to be president of Iowa. Let's elect you president of Iowa, which was a way of saying, I need to win the first primary. I need to get early downloads. So he's a professor, so he could conceivably have known of this paper, but he had a keen intuitive awareness of the social dynamics that your observing in the music lab experiment. There's a fiendish variation on the music lab experiment in which the experiment is inverted popularity. So they said that the worst song in the control was doing really well. They showed people I Am Error succeeding super well. And they showed the best song, let's say Nah, doing really badly. What do you think would happen then? Basically, the inversion worked. It turned out that the worst song in the control did very, very well in the treatment conditions, precisely and only because it was signaled as extremely popular. Now, the best songs in the control couldn't be kept permanently down. They would make it over an extended time, but the best songs would make it. But the second best songs stayed down. And notice that the experiment I just described, has favorable conditions compared to the real world for the ultimate victory of excellence, really favorable conditions. It's rigidly controlled. If someone has, let's just take a random example, a new book coming out on May 21st, whether that's going to do super well or not will depend on 1,001 factors, not just on social influences. Okay, you might ask, does this generalize? Well, what's the cutest of these? These aren't quite Ganimals, but they look pretty close to Ganimals. What's the cutest? And it turns out that in former groups, everyone thought that kind of piggish one on the top right is the cutest. Okay. It turns out, rewind the time machine. We're going back 45 seconds. Turns out everyone thought the little kangaroo bottom right is in the time machine. In reality, the one on the bottom right, that was the most cute, according to people. Now, what do you think? Okay, I'm doing, in a ridiculous way, what was really done, which was to see whether the cuteness of animals would follow the basic pattern of popularity of songs. Sure enough, it did. Now, of course, you couldn't make a horribly uncute animal very popular. I say that possibly recklessly, but you have a lot of flexibility to make a animal popular. What about political convictions? What if you record in real time who is liking certain policies and you give people one bit of information, the political party that is drawn to the policy? So suppose you ask, should we promote nanotechnology? And you're in a group and you're seeing in real time, Democrats really like it. Or you're seeing in real time, Republicans really like it. Will that affect views? As a first approximation, there are multiple equilibria with respect to the popularity of political convictions that Republicans will converge on, yay, nanotechnology, it's great. And Ds will think it's terrible because Rs are starting early to like it, and it would completely flip if serendipitously the early Ds liked it and the early Rs didn't. If you see some issues, it won't work for everything. Like on immigration, Rs and Ds are pretty well defined right now, at least in the United States. But on other issues, the potential for massive movement that is extremely shocking in retrospect really is there because of something like what was described in the music lab. Okay, here are four mechanisms that help explain fame and success. Um, Ms. Swift, I think you're amazing, but you benefit from every one of these. Should I tell you a little story about Taylor Swift and my own fandom? I heard her sing Mean at the Grammys, and I thought, who is this person? She's off the charts. I also thought to myself, I don't know anything, so maybe my admiration for this singer is clueless. You know who Neil Young is? Neil Young is he's not quite Bob Dylan, but he's really, really, really good. So I looked up what people like Neil Young thought of Taylor Swift in 2012, and Neil Young is the real deal. And he said, Taylor Swift is the real deal. And I thought, vindication. Now, it occurs to me for the first time that what I might be describing is my own participation in a music lab experiment. And maybe that wasn't the Neil Young, maybe that was just a person named Neil Young, or maybe it was a bot. But in any case, my admiration for her has endured and increased. Okay, informational cascades occur when you're deciding what to buy. Let's say what razor to buy. Let's suppose you're interested in either the Norelco rotary razor or the evil alternative kind that kind of burns, but the cool people like better. Uh, Remington, I think it's called. And let's suppose that you hear that your friends are getting, this might be a gendered example, forgive it is, but everyone likes razors, shavers that are electric. Yes? Everyone in the room? Okay, the men are nodding more than the women. So um, let's suppose you learn everyone likes the rotary, you know, and by everyone you mean two, because you only have two friends, or two friends that you're willing to talk to about this kind of thing. And then you get it too, and you happen to have two friends, and you say, I got the Norelco rotary. I'm not an investor in Norelco or rotary racers, I hasten to add. And then your friend thinks, well, there are four people apparently who like it. And then that friend would have to have a lot of private information to choose Remington rather than Norelco rotary. So this is a very exotic and pointless example. Think of this as the Beatlemania phenomenon by which people were moved by the informational signal that they kept amplifying. And the fact that Beatlemania or Swiftmania has the magnitude it does is owed in significant part to the very, very loud informational content of the enthusiasm of predecessors. And businesses, of course, try to create informational cascades by emphasizing their own popularity. Reputational cascade is one in which people aren't moved by the informational signal given by the apparent judgment of others, but by the reputational signal given by their enthusiasm or not. So if you learn people think that Obama's really, really good, and if you don't say that, or at least act consistently with that, you will be incurring their wrath or disapproval. You might come to think that, or say you think that Obama's really, really good. A story for you. When I was at the University of Chicago, there was a faculty member who was very right of center. Now, there are a lot of faculty members at Chicago who are very right of center, but I'm thinking of a particular one. And he was at a dinner which had added someone extremely far left who'd been in jail for radical activities or on the run, someone who was really, really, really left and very charismatic and very firm. And I saw the left wing guy saying various things about capitalism in the United States that were so far left, it was, a sight to behold. And I didn't agree with them, but that's just a detail. What was more interesting was my right wing friend was agreeing with everything he said, not just agreeing, but repeating it in real time. So, left wing radical, former criminal guy was saying capitalism X, and right wing law professor was saying capital X, repeating everything. What was he doing? He was under reputational pressure from that very firm and angry and charismatic guy, and take that as something that we all sometimes are influenced by. If people think you should buy this or favor that, you might say you do, even if you don't quite. And you say you do in a way that intensifies the reputational pressure that others are under. And this really does help account for the rise of President Trump, reputational cascade moved. Group polarization means if you get a group of people who tend to think some proposition and they talk to one another, over the course of time, the likelihood is they're going to become more unified, more confident, and more extreme. Get a group of people in a room who think that uh, Miley Cyrus is underrated. I'm going into that room. Will you join me? She's really good, Miley Cyrus. You know what I'm talking about, yes? Okay, or you don't like her that much. Okay, let's suppose we go into a room and let's suppose we all tend to think Miley Cyrus is underrated. after we talk with one another, our commitment to that belief will grow. And we see that with political convictions, we see it with professional judges, we see it with doctors in small groups, that deliberation among like-minded people increases confidence, unity, and intensity of commitment to the belief. Stan Lee, remember Marvel Comics guy? He showed a fantastic intuitive awareness of group polarization. He tried to create clubs of Marvel fans. Merry Marvel Marching Society, I think was one. He created this and he said, you can get a sticker, you can be part of it. And this was a fantastic marketing technique to create a little machinery for group polarization. Network effects mean, of course, that if you are in a network, you will benefit from that independent of the thing that exists, that the value of the thing increases by virtue of the existence of a network. There's data suggesting that many young people would pay a fair bit or demand a fair bit to stay off TikTok or Instagram. How much do you have to pay me to stay off Instagram? A lot of young people say a lot, but then they're asked, how much would you pay me how much would I have to pay you to stay off Instagram contingent on everyone you know being off Instagram? Then they say, oh, in that case, I'll pay you. That's the data. That's stunning. Yes, that's staggering. People demand significant payment to be off Instagram or um, TikTok, but those people would themselves be willing to pay a significant percentage, approximately half, to get rid of the thing entirely, which suggests the whole value of Instagram and TikTok for a large chunk of the population is the network effect. The thing itself doesn't have a benefit. Okay, we need to know power laws, and I'm not going to do the math here because I was a literature major and I might screw it up a little bit, but just see the graph. This is a winner-take-all graph in which popularity is concentrated at the top and fading toward the bottom. Here's something which is extraordinary, amazing, and fantastic. Books, songs, video games, and movies all show power law distributions. They look like, they all look basically like that, which is to say, let's say the Beatles are at the top and the Dave Clark Five are there at the bottom, that John Keats in his lifetime is there at the bottom, and Connie Converse, if justice prevails, will be at the top, and that Marvel Comics movies are there at the top, but really good movies that only 4 people in this room have seen are at the bottom, and the distribution could have been otherwise. Okay, here's some limits of algorithms that are relevant. Whether a family that's fragile is going to have a set of outcomes that are not at all good for family members is essentially impossible for an algorithm to predict ex ante. Pause over that. You have a family, it's fragile, that people are struggling, then isolate 5 outcomes and predict whether they're going to happen in 4 or 5 years. Algorithms do very poorly, not a lot better than chance. Whether there's going to be a revolution in a country appears to have the same characteristic, where for experts we know to predict revolutionary success or failure is extremely hard to predict. We know that music and books and movies are hazardous to predict the success of. I'm seized this week with Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow because he was a beloved friend and the world lost him very recently. Let's celebrate rather than mourn. That's what he'd want. His book, Thinking Fast and Slow, has sold approximately an infinite number of copies, give or take. How'd that happen? Thinking Fast and Slow, a book about psychology by someone who studied the availability heuristic and loss aversion. That's a bestseller. That was 14 on the Amazon bestseller list last week. That's millions and millions of copies. That is not predictable. It looks like to predict romance is really hard. If you put 2 people together whom it is predicted will produce sparks and sparks and sparks, the prediction is highly unlikely to work. And that's in the domain of Beatlemania. Connie Converse is not making it. The Keats eventually making it. Austen triumphing. Lynn Hunt was a contemporary of Keats, thought to be better than Keats by most. Lynn Hunt, how many of you have heard of him? In fact, I, who wrote this book in which Hunt features prominently, have heard of him so fragilely that I'm not even certain I've got his name right. Um, Hunt was really, really good, but we've forgotten him. Okay, here's an elephant in the room. Jane Franklin, Ben Franklin's sister, who was barely literate. Her brother was the smartest person in the world. She was barely literate. People thought at the time of childhood they were the same, really. And Franklin was female and not educated. Frank, Franklin was amply educated and made it. Jane Franklin could hardly write. Here are some of her words in her imperfect letters. Thousands of Boyles, Clarks, and Newtons have probably been lost to the world and lived and died in ignorance and meanness, uh, merely for want of being placed in favorable situations and enjoying proper advantages. Very few we know is able to beat through all impediments and arrive to any great degree of superiority and understanding. That's both brilliant and unbearably poignant, isn't it? What she's saying, writing to her brother, saying, there are Boyles and Clarks and Newton. Maybe I would have been one of them. I think that's crying out. But want of being placed in favorable situations. That's Ecclesiastes, but it takes an elephant and puts it right in the room. That is unfairly distributed equalities. As I speak, I'm alert to the fact that probably everyone in this room, something happened that got you to be in this room. Maybe you can think of one thing that got you to Harvard. Yes. I'll tell you mine, shall I? The conversation I had with my best friend when I was 11 years walking to my public school in New England. He said he was applying to private schools. I had no idea what that was. As a result, I asked my parents, should I apply to private schools? What are they? My father almost had a heart attack. How's he going to afford it? My mother was thrilled. What an opportunity for our kid. And no way I'd be able to stand in front of you without that conversation, which might not have happened if my friend Roger hadn't been crossing my path on that morning before school. That's really serendipitous. Okay. There's President Obama, for whom I worked. I almost never say anything about what he said in private, and I'm probably going to see him pretty soon, and I hope he's going to forgive what I'm doing now. Uh, uh, at one dinner, uh, it was a small dinner that I got to go to, and before it, I knew him at the University of Chicago, so he was a friend, and he was just kind of talking, not being president. And he said, CEOs think I don't like. It's not at all true. He said, I don't dislike them at all. And then he paused and he said, but there is one thing that the number of things that had to happen for me to become president was very large and they're luck. And he said, I hope I'm doing a good job. I think I'm doing a good job. But I'm alert to the fact that what got me here wasn't just me. And he said, some of the CEOs, at least, they're terrific. They're really good at what they do, but they're not as alert as they might be to the fact that 17 things happened that could have happened otherwise that got them to be CEOs. Okay, so the black box is luck and serendipity. Let's talk a little bit about that. I had a brilliant Harvard Law student a few years ago, both brilliant and endlessly energetic, who said, I want to call successful people all over the United States and do a paper on what they have in common. So I want to make calls to people in business, in multiple fields, to people in culture, to people in sports, and I want to isolate what makes them all um, ama amazingly successful, and then I want to write a book about it. And I had an intuition there was something not right about that project. I thought that she's amazing and it's not a good project. But law professor as I am, I didn't think it was doomed. I thought she'd succeed. Everyone would talk to her. She was brilliant and not undiligent. Then I called Danny Kahneman and I said, "What do you think of this project?" And he said, "It's terrible." Uh, I said, "I have an intuition to that effect. Explain my intuition." And he said, "She's sampling on the dependent variable." And that means that she's finding a dependent variable. She's going to elicit it. Maybe it's tough childhoods, or maybe it's struggles in high school, and finding that unifies, let's say, the 500 people she talks to, she's lucky. But there are 500,000 people who had tough childhoods, who struggled in childhood, who didn't make it. So to isolate the common ingredient among the amazing people isn't to tell you anything. It doesn't tell you it's causally responsible. But intuition strongly suggests she's onto something. Intuition is misleading us. There are many super successful business books that do exactly what she tried to do. Yes, the sample on the dependent variable. In fact, the books are so successful and famous, they have names that you would have heard of, that it's tempting to think a key to success in publishing is to sample on the dependent variable, but let's not fall into temptation. Okay, so on success stories, false beliefs are a result. We can actually demonstrate that empirically, that if people are alerted to, let's say, college dropouts who formed extremely successful companies, then they will predict that college dropouts are associated with business success. And if they're presented with cases in which college graduates did really well, in business, they'll think college graduation is associated with success under experimental settings in which the intuition that the success stories are diagnostic is really hard to resist. Okay, here's a list from a literature professor who studied Keats and Blake and others. Quality, quantity, champions, and biography are extremely relevant to ultimate success. This has business implications. Those of us who write a lot of papers are cheered by this. Yes, quantity, that makes it on the list. Um, Champions, people need, as Jane Austen got or William Blake got, and the Beatles big time got, they need champions. An interesting biography, about James Dean is an interesting biography. Number of copies in circulation, being anthologized, being subject to controversy, being endorsed by celebrities. These all really help. It's a pretty good list, but we have a little chart. It's actually a sentence that the analysis I guess gave you is sampling on the dependent variable. Still, in this case, it's instructive because the demonstrable association between the things described in success or fame is real. Okay, here's our hero of the day, Danny Kahneman. He is a prophet of noise, urging that in business, judgments are often noisy, that it's very hard to see that because history is only run once. So if a business decides to launch a product, it's very hard to see that it could have easily gone the other way. Maybe if the day was cold rather than warm, maybe if some grumpy person had spoken early. But because history is only run once, we don't see that. If Oprah endorsed a book in the days in which she did that, vaulting, 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 did that book? Did I just sound a little like Yoda? I hope not. Gore Vidal said when Truman Capote died, dying was that was a wise career move. And there's a recent empirical white paper showing that's true, that dying is a good career move, that people who are at least a little bit famous become a lot more famous and sell a lot after they die. That's super interesting. What's the mechanism there? Some are generalizable, that people immediately become a source of attention. So people are thinking about them. They died. They look at their book. Or I think this is more interesting, though less generalizable. Someone you care about dies. One way people grieve is they want to spend time with them. And people we know about, writers, actors, people in business, they die, and we're grieving. We want to look at their old photographs. Okay, there's the greatest of all time. Don't argue. I didn't say the greatest what, the greatest everything of all time. That's Muhammad Ali. Uh, he was my hero and remains my hero. There he is standing over Sonny Liston after a first round knockout. The resonance of this isn't getting to you deeply enough, and I'm not sure what form of words to do that. The guy who's up on the ground was the most menacing and scary boxer who ever lived. Sonny Liston thought he could destroy anyone. The guy who's standing up was young and brash and believed this is the second fight, believed that he was the underdog in this one too. In the first fight, which Ali won, he was massive underdog, no chance. And he knocked Liston down. And in this photograph, he's saying, uh, get up, don't end the fight. He's about to knock out Liston. He's telling him to get up. The guy had, what does cojones mean? I don't know what the word cojones means, but the guy had cojones. Uh, okay. How did Muhammad Ali become Muhammad Ali? The greatest fighter ever, I think universally regarded as that. He got his bicycle stolen when he was 12 years old. He really hated that. He went up to a police officer named Joe and said, my bicycle's been stolen. I'm going to whoop the guy. And the guy looked at him and said, well, if you're going to whoop somebody, you better learn how to fight. And Ali, Cassius Clay then, he said, basically, what's that? How do I do that? And it just happened that the guy, Joe, ran a boxing gym right near where they were talking. He said, come in, I'll teach you. Would Ali have become a boxer without that? What's the path? Just a kid in Louisville. Okay. Uh, we've heard about tragedies and losses in this extremely happy set of remarks. So Connie Converse died tragically. So did Robert Johnson. So did countless people that Jane Franklin pointed to in her beautiful and not quite perfectly written comment about lost types. There are also opportunities and gains, aren't there, in these tales for people all around us, like there? Um, these are remarks which have a political purpose. They're about not getting lost. You can see Connie Converse as a metaphor for people who maybe died in 1970 or 1820, who are being discovered all the time, and for people who are all around us today at risk of getting lost, who there but for the grace of God, we would go, and with a little grace on our part, they'll be here. Here's a coda, the most romantic words Bob Dylan ever wrote. Isis. She said, where you been after a parting? I said, no place special. She said, you look different. I said, well, I guess. She said, you've been gone. This resonate a little with experience sometimes. To answer, I said, that's only natural. She said, you're going to stay. He, and here Dylan's echoing the last word of Ulysses, changing gender, but echoing the last word of Ulysses. If you want me to, yes. But that's not the best part of the song. Here's the best part. I still can remember the way that you smiled on the 5th day of May in the drizzling rain. Thanks.
We have time for questions. And if you use the mic, you need to use the microphone because we have like about 100 people online. and they won't hear you if you don't use the microphone, but Cass is kind enough to answer questions.
This is the debut of this project, so no pressure.
Thank you for the amazing talk. I'm curious, why do you think? Do you think it's the right goal to be famous? Like, should it be incidental to some other pursuits? Otherwise, I think it's so much to luck, and it should be serendipitous, and maybe it shouldn't be the right goal for people to even pursue from the beginning.
The only thing that matters really in life is to be famous. Like, to be happy or useful or have productive relations. The only thing. um, uh, I, I think the opposite of what I just said is more nearly true. That in terms of what one wants in life, you know, I don't have anything original to say about that. Love isn't bad. It's really good. Is this original? Do you hear a new book coming? Uh, relationships with others that one feels calmer and bigger because of, and that you could do that for those people. This is becoming a really terrible book, and I'm not going to write it. So the book is meant partly as a joke. And the book explains the reason for the joke, that there is no how-to manual. Now, the book isn't only a joke, because for those who want to increase the chances, we can form a consulting firm, the 90 of us. Shall we fame exclamation point? That's already taken. Becomingfamous.org? No, .com. Fame might be understood as a byproduct of doing something that you really like or that is valuable, rather than something you pursue for its own sake. So I like Dylan's response. I mean, you know, he was trying to write great songs, and he wanted to make a living, and he wanted people to listen to his songs. But the question, how'd you become famous? His answer to that was like, I don't know. That's what he's saying. So I would not advise my son and daughter. I have 3 kids, but my son and daughter still living at home. I would not advise them, no, this is what you want, fame. I wouldn't advise that.
Thank you so much. What do you think the outcome would be of more people absorbing the fact that serendipity and spontaneity is so much a part of how we end up where we are?
Great. Humility on the part of people who've found a good path, and increased opportunity for people who are struggling. Both of those.
Is it? Oh. Given the role of like luck and serendipity, is the trick then to just play the slot machine of life as many times as possible?
Yes, that's great. So if the goal is, let's say, to succeed in the path that you've made out for yourself, to keep at it is really good. So we didn't talk about the Beatles. They were pretty persistent, though they almost gave up. They couldn't get a record contract. They were turned down repeatedly. They couldn't get any record contract. One record company, and there weren't a whole lot in England, said the boys won't go. You know? And others just laughed at their name. They kept at it. But it wouldn't be right to say that keeping at it is sufficient for the Beatles to become the Beatles. They needed a bunch of other things to work for them. But to keep at it, crucial. Connie Converse quit. Could she have made it if she kept at it? Probably not, but maybe. And there are things that can be done. You know, it depends on the right networks. People who are going to promote, you know, if you have a product or a company, things that are going to promote the thing, of course, that can make all the difference.
Thanks. I'm sure you're right that luck plays a huge part in lives, in success, etc. I've always thought also picking your parents very carefully really helps. But you're right about serendipity. But I wonder, in the same way as the last question, whether you can make your own serendipity, whether by being out there doing the networking, going out and being at places like Harvard, which give you lots of opportunities, you can increase the sort of load the dice in the slot machine or whatever you however.
Completely. So the ability to increase probabilities is real, and to increase the chance that you get into Harvard, people can do that, or decrease it, of course, to increase the probability that your product or your candidate, take candidate as a universe of things, does well, you can do that. Obama was brilliant at his campaign strategy under extremely unlikely circumstances, and created networks, created group polarization. And if you're starting a little company, think of things that succeeded. They're typically, not always, but typically they're great. And also there was real agility in doing something like what was done by luck to Jane Austen and William Blake.
I have the mic already. Thanks for your talk. Do you think hard work plays any role in this? Like, if someone is really hardworking, there is an increased chance of achieving something.
Definitely. So if you look at this guy, Dylan, he was an extremely hard worker. Stan Lee was a workhorse in terms of the number of hours he devoted to comic books. Jane Austen worked really hard on what she did. It's sometimes amazing to find successful figures whom we think of as, the universe's beneficiary, to see how much labor. Now, whether they hated it or not, probably some combination of the two. I did a book with Danny Kahneman, when he was in his 80s, and he's spectacularly successful. And at age 85 and 86, both the number of hours and the amount of intense self-criticism he imposed on self was off the charts. And of course, that's relevant. Now, we don't want to sample on the dependent variable. There are plenty of people who work really hard and nothing good happens. But to see it as a marker is unquestionably correct. Smiling a little bit because my other kind of behavioral economics co-author, Dick Thaler, is famously lazy. He's not a hard worker. Now, why does that work for him? And I think in the case of Thaler, it's that because he's lazy, he won't work on anything unless he's very confident it's really, really good. So I've suggested to him probably 18 papers that are good. And every one he said no. It has to be something that makes his eyes light. And so all his papers are home runs. Now, does he work very hard on his own papers? Yeah. But he's not like Bob Dylan or Danny Kahneman in his intensity of hours.
Questions back here.
So this is maybe a little bit of an.
Who's behind you, but she's been very
Oh,
patient.
sorry.
I'm gonna go first, and then you're gonna go.
Building on your other work, would you say that there's a policy implication here of not learning from specific case studies, for example?
Sure. So I'd see not learning might be a little too strong, but to be very cautious about case studies. I think that's fair. It depends on what they're being used for. If they're being used to suggest a generalizable truth because someone did super well or someone did badly, cautionary notes with the sound roughly of Neil Young's Rockin' in the Free World. It's the right song for that cautionary note. In fact, it's the right lyrics, and play it loud. You probably don't know the song. Watch the version on Saturday Night Live. He burned the house down.
So this might be a little unacademic question, but given the many examples you have shown us, I wanted to ask if you have any thoughts on the Kardashians.
The Kardashians, I once saw, the only thought I have about the Kardashians is I was at a big party and I saw at the next table, there was Kim Kardashian and there was my wife, and they were engaged in extremely intense conversation. Can you imagine how surreal that is, seeing your wife and when she came back, I said, Samantha, what were you talking to her about? And she said, the Armenian genocide. So that was impressive. So I'm from little data point, I'm pro Kim Kardashian.
We have one last question.
Thank you so much. So a quick question about, so I read your book about social change, and not being a scholar, like at my HKS, doing all those studies. But the more I study about revolutions and social change, the more humbling that I become. And I used to do some economic forecasts at investment banks, but I know that maybe if my forecast is right, it's probably because of luck. So in terms of social science as a guidance for how the society will evolve, do you have any comments and thoughts on this?
It's great. Thank you for that. So predicting whether some defendant who's been arrested is going to flee the jurisdiction based on specified factors, judges are pretty good at that, and the algorithms are better. Algorithms can predict various medical outcomes with impressively high degree of accuracy. So there are domains in which human prediction, highly disciplined, forecasting. I'll give you a funny example, what I think is a funny example, and machine learning prediction is quite good. I was watching a tennis match with my son, who's a very avid tennis player, and he he asked me a forecasting exercise, what's the chance that Djokovic wins? And Djokovic was down 2-0, and he's Djokovic. For those who don't know, he's the greatest tennis player in the history of the world. I say with regret, because he's not my favorite, but he's probably the greatest. And so I said to my son, 50%. That was really stupid forecasting on my part, and I should have known better. Because people who are good forecasters, you probably know the super forecasters, they disaggregate the ingredients of judgment. So to do it very crudely, what's the chance Djokovic wins the third set having lost the first two? Let's say rough and ready, it can't be a lot higher than 50%. Let's say because he's Djokovic, it's 60%. Then if he wins the third, what's the chance that he wins the fourth contingent on winning the third? It can't be higher than 70. We're just highballing it offhand. This is kind of knowable based on data sets. And then it's 42% he wins the fourth set. And we're already significantly under my 50% prediction. So to disaggregate the components of judgment is essential. For budget forecasts, the planning fallacy is likely to come in. The data is consistent with unrealistic optimism. But you would know better than I whether it's a situation like whether there's going to be a revolution, whether a song's going to do well, or whether there's a bound in which some sort of economic forecasting is better than random. It might be that aggregating multiple judgments, typically that's better. And
Terrific. I'd like to thank Cass for coming.
yeah.